What is up, guys? My name is Sam World, and I make sound design and music production videos for dance music here on YouTube. And in today's episode of The Dojo, we are joined by New York-based producers, Truth and Lies. How are you guys?
Good.
How you doing, man?
You guys doing?
Doing really good. And we're also joined by Soul. Where are you from, Soul? From the UK?
London.
London? Okay, London, dude.
Come on.
All right, guys. So I'm super excited today because Truth and Lies are going to be showing us one of their sick tracks. It's probably their most played track at the moment on Spotify, which is going to be Understand. About 400,000 streams almost. So hopefully you guys can get it up there. I think they only need like 670, if I know my math right. And they're going to be showing us this track. First question to you guys is, how did this track come to be? Was there any idea one of you guys had floating in there like, oh, we got to do this? Was it the bass line?
Actually, so the vocals on this track is Ryan's wife, Hannah, who is an opera singer. So she's, has quite a good voice, and she did vocals on a couple tracks for us, including our first ever, or like one of our first ever deep house tracks called City Lights. So we have learned a little bit since then about vocal processing and recording and stuff, and we've been wanting to get Hannah on another track. We haven't, done a deep house, tech house track with her yet, except for Understand, right?
Yeah.
So this was the first tech house track we did with her, and we just have been really into like tracks with no verses, kind of just like short, catchy hooks and some ad libs and just like thick bass lines.
And I think that when she wrote the vocal, all we had was just a small drum loop and the bass line. That was it.
We wrote pretty much this whole track together. She was in the room with us when we did the instrumental, and we were there when she was working on the vocal, and the lyrics as well. So
Ryan.
And we recorded it right here in this room.
It's a family affair, I'd say.
Yeah.
You're a lucky man, Ryan. Vocals are hard to come by.
Honestly, that's one thing we always talk about. It's really hard to find unique vocals, especially with Splice now. Splice is just so difficult to go through and find something that's like, oh, this hasn't been used yet, or oh, this is catchy enough where I can remember it.
With sort of the tech house vocals at the moment, which is the direction that you guys were talking about, sort of like short hooks, catchy sort of thing. It's a bit of a weird process to sort of write them. How do you sort of get in that mindset of writing like a short hook versus a verse or something like that?
I think the big thing is that we spend the time writing a lot of other things in our tracks, like synths and stuff, to make the space, or add more drums to make the space so that we can make a simple vocal. He has a voice memo thing. He records voice memos or writes stuff down, and then he'll send it to me, or then Hannah will come to us. My wife is Hannah, and she'll come to us and say, oh, I have this idea for a vocal. She'll hear something and she'll just start humming it. And when Hannah was thinking about this, she was trying to have that diva house kind of sound, like the 90s diva house sound, but a little more modern and a little more simple.
Well, it's time for us to understand the understand of the song. Yeah. So with that being said, so lead us to the kick and bass, bro.
All right, let's start here. So kicks, here, we generally like to find a really good meaty kick. And then if there's something wrong with the kick or something missing with the kick, we try to go through and add to it. And generally we have some 909 kicks we like, so I can play a little bit of what this sounds like.
Hold on, before you go in, typically what we'll do is we'll have two layers to it, right? We'll find a nice meaty one, and then we'll do like a nice top little click sort of thing. Occasionally we'll only use one, but one thing you'll notice going forward, and this kind of goes for all of our samples, not just kicks, is we really, really much prefer to find good samples and do less to them than to find these samples. Sorry, can I curse on this or no?
Yeah, I'll beep you out.
Okay, all right. So it's better to take good samples than to find bad samples and try to fix them up, because that's just wasted time in our opinion.
Most of our kick drums are some variation of a 909, so I'll play one layer by itself.
So there's not too much going on with the EQ.
So it's just taking out some boxiness in this range and a little bit of high range, the clicky kind of stuff that are in kick drums. To make room
for the click, yeah.
And then another layer, which is like, here, you can see it on the screen. It's just very, very high pass. It's just the click of it. And you put them together and you get a little. And then on each channel, I mean, there's a little bit on the top kick. There's not much here. It's just a little bit of EQ taking out the top end of it. And then the lower kick has some ducts in this boxy area here. It's got C6 on it, so it's doing a little bit of multiband compression.
Can you see our pop-out window or no?
Yeah.
Okay.
With it. And it's not much of a difference, but it's a huge difference with all the other things in our tracks because we have quite a lot of low end. And then there's just a little processing on them together. Again, C6 on to group them, to glue them together, and a little bit of Pro Q3, which is just ducking again
That boxiness.
the boxiness. And 909 kicks have a lot of boxiness. So when we just try to keep the volume of the kick without losing too much of the
boxiness just lives between 100 and 200 anyway.
Yeah, it can make a track sound too weird if there's too much of it. And this kick has quite a lot of it. It's a very boxy kick. And then on here, a limiter just to bring up the volume and then just cut off the top a little bit. And this auto filter is all it's doing is just automating in the breaks. If it's going to be no low end, no high end, etc. But this one is just for I think just low end on this kick. And also in the breaks, we have a utility here that will automate the volume of the kick just on and off, basically.
Yep.
We have an EQ3 just boost the mid range that we've lost a little bit because of taking too much out of the boxiness. We probably could have done it a different way, but this way was the easiest way to make it sound a little clearer. And then we have volume shaper, and volume shaper for us for kicks allows us to really tame the tails of the kicks. So if I play it without it and I play it with it,
it's taking off like at least a 30-second notes worth of tail.
yeah, and it just feels a little tighter and a little more compact.
And not everybody will need to do this. A lot of people like longer kicks, but like I was saying before, we have those really busy bass lines. At least during this point, our bass lines have changed a little bit since we wrote this, but we were doing a lot of 16th note, like the rolling bass lines, like I was mentioning earlier. And so you need a lot of space in between your kicks.
And then if we talk about the low end here, 2 layers, which we like to do on a lot of tracks. It just depends on what you really want. But 1 layer is providing the character up top, and the other layer is providing the low end. And we can have a little more control this way, especially depending on what the kick situation is like, depending on what the vibe of the track is.
We almost always separate our sub and our bass.
Yeah,
almost like 95% of the time.
On here, it's just the top layer is just a silent patch. It's just an initial patch that we
love
modified.
silent.
So I'd say most of our projects, bass lines are made in Silent or some Arturia synth or Monarch. Drum bus, doing a little beefing up the sound. I'll play this layer so you can hear it by itself.
So is your sub layer on this just the same patch, but with the processing off just an EQ?
We do slight changes so to avoid phasing.
Yeah.
But we do duplicate it, and then we'll just change like the wavetable a little bit.
Yeah, or the filter or distortion or what it may be.
Yeah,
not much
octaves.
Yeah.
It has the same general character with enough differences to make sure it's not phasing out.
Yeah. So this is before any processing on this layer.
It's a pretty gnarly sound by itself,
Yeah.
I mean,
and then the big thing here is you can tell when you get down here, this EQ is cutting off all the low end. So if I keep that on and turn everything else off.
Very low, dry wet amount. Just what we like to do is we like to, do little gain staging of our saturation and our sounds like that. If you just put it on, one plugin and slam it, you're not going to get the bonuses and the difference in textures that you're going to get from stacking different saturators.
Yeah. And the next thing is limiter. This is just bringing up some volume and doing a little bit of gain reduction because some of these notes jump around a little bit too much. Compressor, it's just right after the limiter, doing just a little bit of compression. And it's not much of a difference, but when you hear it with how much stuff's going on in the track, it makes a huge difference.
Just a little on the top.
Yep, C6.
So you've got the compressor after the limiter. Is that just because you weren't slamming the limiter right down on those top notes?
Yeah, exactly. The limiter is just catching anything that's really excessive, and the compressor is going to do more of the work.
So you're putting a compressor on there. Was there like a reasoning for it, or did you just feel like for instance, the purpose of this one would be what? Add sustain, give more punch.
It's mostly just to help with the limiter. Like if you notice, the high note at the end of the phrase up here is considerably higher than down here. So these would pop out of the mix without, the higher pitch notes would pop out of the mix without some glue compression and some limiting.
And that's something that we notice when we're playing shows, because whenever you play something like whenever you hear a bass line that's the same note over and over again, it sounds really consistent and clean on systems. And it's really hard to achieve that without getting without having the compression for the upper notes and low notes to get them the same balance.
We don't do that. We do, all of our bass lines have typically like 3 to 4 notes.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then also too, a little attack through on this so that the little attack comes through. And then another compressor, but this is just C6. This is just a mono compressor, which is just, it's really cutting a lot of the stuff up here that we don't really need. So I'll play this here. And
so you see, we have like pretty much a descending threshold.
Yeah. And the big reason for this is that whenever you get like stuff that's high, I know a lot of people talk about cutting low end off of things so that you can balance your low end, but cutting the high end off of things allows you also have more space for things to come through the mix. So we did that here.
It's going to make your leads and it's going to make your vocals pop through when they're not fighting.
Yeah. And also your drums as well.
Yeah.
Then after that, saturation and one stage, a little bit of the Ableton saturator.
We're huge fans of the Ableton saturator.
The EQ here is cutting off the low end. So all the low end's gone for the sub to come through. And then some dips in the areas, dip around like in the 100, 130 range, because that area is pretty muddy in general.
A lot of mud in there.
And then this area too, which was where, because this bass has very, very sawy, we wanted to keep it from like really being too sawy and too loud to, it sounds better on systems like this than
and that's
it would
where
be.
The top layer of our bass is living anyway.
Yeah, exactly. And then Saturn 2, which is just doing some
just stacking more saturation. Everything's at like 20 to 30%. It's all very low. We're just, like I said before, we're just getting those different textures from each saturator.
Yeah, and this is just on 30% mix on the gentle saturator preset.
The saturator.
So, and then the last thing is an auto filter, which is really only automating. It's on for the whole track, but I think it's just automating when the sub automates, the bass automates. So when the bass automates, the filter automates on the on silent here, and this filter opens up. So if I play this much here.
Yeah, so that's one thing that we do is instead of using one saturator and then trying to automate it for each different thing, we'll kind of just use a different saturator for each set of automations we want to do, and then just turn it on and off for that section.
Yeah,
it saves time in the long run.
Yep. This utility here, I'll just mention this, but we have it by default in all of our tracks to have a utility so we can do gain staging, and we didn't really need it. But a good tip is to always have a utility at the end of your chains or near the end of your chains, just so that you can do some volume automation for stuff that you don't have to worry about.
You should never automate your track volume.
And a volume shaper doing some side chaining. It's not on fully, so it's just kind of one of these basic shapes of the volume here, just going up and down there.
Yeah.
And then this EQ here is because we didn't like how the up high end still sounded too sawy and too big. So
that's kind of what you were talking about there. We didn't use a C6 there. We used a shelf EQ. So you could see it's really just situational. Yeah.
One other thing I'll just mention here is we have a send that we send most of our sounds to. It's just this like compression send, which is just this kind of extreme compression, and it allows us to basically take the sound, and I'll open both these up so you can see what they look like. But it's basically extreme compression and some saturation and some distortion, and just to cut off the low end on it.
Just adds a little texture.
Yeah, and it allows us to get all the sounds that we want to go through, like synths and things, to sound like they're more similar to each other, more in the same room. Yeah. This was that on.
It's pretty minimal, but just adding a little bit of that grit of like 300 or so.
Yeah.
So did you say you said everything there, or is it just your synths and basses, or?
Synths and basses to varying degrees. It's not really, it's not doing too much.
It's just a little sauce, a little tiny bit of sauce, it's kind of like a little last dollop on the top. So it's whatever you think needs a little bit of compression, a little saturation. Typically it's just for our, mid-range stuff.
All right. Next layer on the low end is the sub. You can see, if you look back, if I go back here, the processing, this exact same processing that's there is here, but things are just turned off and slightly different. For sub, again, it's that same preset from sound, but it's just changed now. instead of being a saw wave, it's now the quarter pulse wave?
I think it's a half pulse.
Where half quarter.
No, it's
half,
a quarter pulse.
quarter pulse,
Yeah.
and then a sine wave to give it some character.
And that's to stop it from phasing, pretty much.
Yeah.
It's like that's what we were saying. It's almost the exact same thing, just like slight wave table change.
Exactly. And then for processing, there's not much going on here. Really, there's no saturation on this. There's a limiter to catch the
There's a little tiny saturator over there.
yeah, there's not really much saturation.
It's
That's
very,
right.
it's very little compared to the
Yep.
the base.
So the limiter, it's kind of doing a lot of work on this one, actually.
I remember we moved it down towards the end because we listened to this on a couple different speakers and we were like, wow, that sub is just destroying everything else in the mix. So I remember we moved the ceiling down a little bit.
And also it helps catch,
Those high notes. Like you were saying
yeah, exactly.
before.
It's doing a lot more on this one because the sustain on this is a little higher than it is on the bass.
It's at that last note of the phrase. It's like you just, before we had that, you just hear that. Just hear that. You hear how much louder that is, that one note at the end. It's just,
And then without it, and you might not be able to hear it without having a sub or some good headphones on, but it really made a huge difference when we started playing it out. Compressor, it basically the same settings
thing.
and just again, it's not much difference. It's just a little bit of gain reduction before.
it just feels more rounded, a little more glued, a little more tamed. This way we could turn it up on the track volume.
Yep. Saturator, again, a little bit of saturation because saturation makes everything sound a little better, especially for subs on speakers. So we do it just a little bit on pretty much everything, but especially on low end. So let's listen to this with it before and after.
Just a little inharmonic,
And it gives a little volume
inharmonic
too.
frequencies, not too much.
EQ is just rolling off stuff underneath of it. It's not really doing much at all. But again, when you're playing on club systems, anything that's down here that's unwanted, it just ends up having like extra stuff that doesn't sound as clean and clear. And then on here, there's an auto filter. If I turn this off, you'll hear some clicks and things from the sub.
This is doing the most work on the sub.
And turn it back on.
And this is like a pretty super important part of our producing right here for the Truth and Lies stuff is we almost always cut our subs off at like 120 and then we fit the bass above that from like 120 to 1,000 or a little above that.
Yeah.
And that's like almost always what we do pretty much.
And then the last piece is side chaining. This is getting pretty heavily side chaining, kind of matching the same length of the kick, so that we want to make sure as the low end of the kick is going away, the low end of the sub comes back up, so there's not too much of a
And we have short
gap.
kicks, so pretty short side chain.
Yes. And then there's a little bit of processing on both of them together just so they sound a little more glued. So I'll play this without the processing that's here.
It's pretty close to the final. I mean, it's just really just touching it up.
And you can see in the EQ here, let's just start from this is right here. You can see in the key EQ here, the low end is still flapping around a little bit. So we put put another cut here. Again, this range on, for whatever reason, is just very boxy. We try to cut a little bit in this area as much as possible in the 100 to 200 range. So we did a little bit here.
I just hear the mud in there when you turn that EQ off.
Yeah, it's just a little more clear. Limiter is providing some more volume and some more, it's just cutting off again some peaks of things that can pop out a little bit. It's not much, but it's just enough to where it keeps a little more clean and clear on the low end when we play on big systems.
Yeah.
And then the C6, which is probably doing the most work here, play it before and after.
Kind of same thing that we said before. It's kind of taming those mids, allowing the sub to pop out, and enables us to turn the channel up more and get it into the
And the same
proper
thing
place
here.
in the mix.
Same thing here with the highs as well. Highs are getting cut off.
Yeah.
Again, the second highest band is a little less highs getting cut off. So most of the time when we use this plugin, this is kind of the way it looks, especially for low end or kicks.
I mean,
just
we only
because-
really use it on low end and kicks.
Yeah, exactly.
So
And this filter is just doing some automation in the breaks to take out the low end. And then we have a little washout we have here for breaks so that it gives it some reverb and delay. So we'll play the little bit of this section here so you can hear what it sounds like.
it kind of fades it into the back of the build. So it's like we still have those frequencies there, but it makes sure that the build and the drop don't sound exactly the same.
And it provides a little energy because it takes away a little low end as it goes too in the builds.
Little movement through automation is how you make the tracks feel alive.
I was gonna ask too. When it comes to, so you have the bass going, right? Does the bass really dictate the drum patterns you're gonna be using for the track as you go into your
We
drums?
actually write our drums first.
Yeah,
For
usually
the most part, we got like a nice top loop, not with too many like not
Usually
too
it's
much
just-
stuff going on. Mostly
Yeah.
like a nice 16th, in the hat clap kick, and maybe like one little chopped up top loop, and then we'll write a bass line. But
Okay.
if we write a bass line first, it sounds weird.
Mhm.
And if we write too much of a top loop and then write the bass line, then the bass line is dictated by the top loop.
yeah.
So there's a nice like middle ground where you write half of the top loop, then write a bass line, and then fill it in on the rest of it to get it really grooving and rhythmic.
Yeah, part of that's the most important part for us is we spend so much time on 16 bars of writing a track.
Yeah,
We-
like
we-
60% of our time on the track is spent like just writing a 16 or 32 bar thing that we then expand out.
As long as the percussion complements the bass, it'll groove really well. And that's part of it is taking sounds out, adding sounds in,
Yeah.
doing
Dope.
things like that.
Can't wait to see the drums.
All right, so the drums, we have our drums are kind of, again, groups and groups, a little bit of organizational thing. So we organize our drums for at least for the top loop drums, not for like builds drums or anything like that.
I guess this is a good time to mention before you go in, we have a full template that we use, right? So all these groups that are here and all these channels that exist in a template, and
Mhm.
instead of having to make new channels, make new groups, rename everything's already named, everything has its sends in there already.
Mhm.
Everything's good to go. Like the second you open up a project, it looks almost like this, except without all the actual stuff in the channels. But the
Yeah.
organization on the right, that's all how this looks.
Yeah, and that's really important because it's workflow helps us. Instead of thinking about, oh, how I'm going to route this or how I'm going to do this, you just get right into making music, which is the most important thing.
I mean, it has to have saved us thousands of hours.
Thousands of hours. I would recommend everyone
Everybody needs to have it.
on your templates here. You can do things like you can see right here. We have TXL new tunes. We have one for when we make DJ sets for Ableton, but you can get as many ones as you want, and you can just load them up there. If you're gonna make things for like, we have one. It's not in there for comping vocals. We have one for just general like DJ mixes, as I said, and then one for like our general tunes. All right, drums. So we have top loops here. We have a clap group, a hat group, and then extras, which extras are like shaker loops, extra one-shot percussion that don't really fit in hats or claps. So the clap group, usually we have a bunch of different claps. I mean, we layer our drums a lot because we want to make sure that we don't have just like the normal drums you hear, like a regular 909 clap or a 707 clap or whatever's basic. We just want to layer drums so we can fill up the spectrum a little bit and to get a unique sound. So that's what our goal is with claps.
So you'll see it. We have a main clap, a short clap, usually like some sort of panned one.
Yep.
And then like a texture, something it's not even always a clap. It could be like, if it needs like some more pop, it'll be a snare.
Or
something
like some
that,
snaps
a
that are super
tambourine or a
panned.
snap, exactly.
Yeah, part of our sound is getting our drums to sound like how we want them to sound and not just be, oh, I just grabbed a top loop and chopped it up. We want to spend a lot of time on drums so that they sound unique and sound like us, which is part of. So main clap, most of these layers don't have much processing on them. So main clap is just this one here. A lot of these claps also, you'll see that we've shortened them a lot. We call this the nightmare trick because we learned this from a YouTube video back in, I don't know, many years ago about taking the clap and shortening it. So a lot of our claps are very long, but we shorten them.
So you got a transients, and then you make sure that arrow is the one single arrow to the right.
For the warping mode
Yes.
beats. Yep. So this is before. It's got a really nice character to it, but it was really long. So we shortened it up. This layer is a short layer, but it's got a delay on it. So a Haas effect delay. So it's just super wide. If I play it by itself without any processing on it, it will sound. it sounds good as is, but we need
that Haas.
Yeah, it needs more stereo for in our claps. If we play this one, it was a pretty mono sounding long clap, which we wanted a little more tail on the clap.
Yeah, you see all the other 3 sounds are so short.
Super short,
like
exactly.
30-second notes short.
And then this dimension expander, I think, is just giving a little bit of width. Want to give it a little width. And then this texture clap here. It doesn't really sound like a clap, it just sounds like a clack. And on all those channels we have, you'll see in pretty much all of our claps, because a lot of claps take up space where the hi-hats are, and at least in Tech House, we take a little bit of hi-hat on each. And I'm just going to solo this here so you can hear like what we cut off.
Kind of the same thing we were talking about with the kicks earlier.
Like that little bit of like hiss every so often, if you have a lot of it, it'll make a huge difference in your track. If I were to turn it off on all of them,
that's the thing. It doesn't sound crazy
clicky
on one track, but when we start stacking up 17 different sounds,
exactly,
you're gonna start to have that build up in the high end.
And then on the clap group, we have just a little bit of saturation, a little bit of stereo, a little bit of overdrive, because we lost a little bit of the high end because we cut a lot on each, and then some EQ, limiter, and then we have 2 volume shapers here. One is
making sure everything
is a little on the shorter side, so I'll just turn this off and on so you can hear. Oops, let me play it again. Here, everything's a little too long, so this was a way for us to get it to be less long. And then another volume shaper, which is doing the opposite. It's actually side chaining it to the kick, because of how many transients are happening on these claps. It sounded like it was like really slapping the kick drum really hard. So we do this quite often when we layer our claps so that they don't interfere too much with the kick drum. So I'll play it before and after. It really allows the transient to not get so dominant in the mix. Yeah, and then hats, same thing. We layer a lot of our hats because we try to have a little bit of stereo, a little bit of punchiness. A lot of times with hats, they can be pretty boring if it's just a regular 909 sound. So we try to find some hats that are
always layer your hats. Don't just put one hat in there.
Yeah, it could be something like as simple as like a really high hat or a shaker or a tambourine you could layer underneath of it. Just find some stuff that works. So we have a short one that's here. And that's just providing some texture, and like it's almost like distorted and kind of like not really a hat. And then we got another one here, which is a typical standard 909 hat. Again, not much going on here, just a little bit of EQ on each channel. There's a hat that's super far pan left. And it looks really long by the sample, but because we took it and shortened it, this is what it would sound like if it wasn't shortened. And then, yeah,
that's terrible.
Right.
But that's kind of how our textures work. Is it's really like purposefully crappy sounding stuff that we're just bringing up to the right point where it's not bothering you, but it's creating that fullness of texture and sound.
Yeah.
You know?
And then there's another hat pan super far right.
Same deal.
Yep, same deal. And then in the same group, we have some rides that happen later on in the track. So these rides here, it just got a little bit of a low cut on it and some side chain on it so that it's not really hitting when the kick hits as much. If I turn the side chain off, it kind of gives a little bit of a pumping effect that makes a lot of sense. And as you notice, like a lot of our hats here are panned one way or another so that it doesn't sound like it's just straight down the middle mono. It's trying to get some stereo, especially in our kind of, I would say our way of writing tech house is that there's not a lot of elements when the kick and bass is mono that you have that are stereo. So you have to make it out of something, either with a synth on a spot or some hi-hats or some claps, because otherwise the track is very mono. And even though it is a club friendly tune by doing things in mono, it really does not help the listener for like Spotify or like someone who wants to listen to it at home. It's really important that you have some kind of stereo in your track, especially if you're writing tech house. And it doesn't have to be a lot, but this is our way of basically, I call it fake stereo when you're just panning different things super hard, like left and right. It's great. And then through a variation on our hi-hat there, you'll hear this little like kind of trashy sounding hi-hat. So every couple bars you'll hear it. Just to give a little bit of variation and not be the exact same every time, so that there's just some kind of variation to the listener. Ironically, it has no processing on it. We probably should have cut something on it, but it sounds good as is.
Got signed without it.
There you go. That's the ultimate rule is, look, if an A&R doesn't have the project and they don't know about music, they're not going to care what's right or wrong. So the most important thing
don't hurt them.
Exactly. That's the most important thing. And then for the hats, we have some processing on the channel. I'll turn off all the processing and play it by itself.
Genius. There you go.
Considerably more on the group processing than it is like for our bass. Our bass is like more taming it, and kind of gluing it together, whereas this is bringing back in a more unified way all those like frequencies that we're cutting out using our EQs.
Yeah. So okay, so this is before and after. It gives a little bit more warmth to the sound, because right now the hi-hats are just, there's so much high end and so much like there's just a lot of stuff that is really good in a hat, but we lose a little bit of warmth in our track if we don't have the high end tamed a little bit, and the saturator does that. And then if we play it with it, it's not doing much, but it's really just giving it a little bit of texture. And because we have so many layers playing and they're all different sounds, it's a way for us to get them to all sound a little bit more like each other. Limiter is just, again, cutting some of the tops off because there's quite a lot of things hitting at the same time, so we don't want them to pop out of the mix. And then EQ here, which is just cutting off low end on stuff. You don't really need any of the stuff that's down here. And
always put an EQ after a saturator, because saturators will add low end back.
Yeah, and I don't know, this is a personal preference thing, I think, for us, is that we like to have our high end be a little clear, and the more stuff that's up there, it's just, it kind of fights for space, especially when you have vocals or like white noise and things. So on a lot of our tracks, we cut off stuff up here. So like up here, you probably won't even hear very much of it. I'll solo what's getting cut off. And we use C-like guitars again to get more stereo out of it. It's not actually running any of the things on here. If you don't know this plugin, but this plugin is basically a great, like, it's great for guitar amps, but for some reason it sounds great on drums. But in this case, we only use the stereo option to give it some stereo width. After little things in the track. So this folder is just called Top Loop Extras. It's basically everything that's in here is either a loop or something that's chopped from a loop, or like an offbeat snare, offbeat hi-hat.
So this is kind of what I was talking about before, is we'll do the kick and the hat and the clap, and then we'll add like one or two of these things. Like you see how there's 5 different loop channels there. I'll open up the loops folder if you would. Yeah. So we'll add like 1 or 2 of these in, and then write the bass line, and then go in and write all the rest of the stuff around the bass line.
Yeah. And in this case, for this track, there's so many of these loops in here that are layered, partly because we wanted it to kind of feel noisy and not like it was a loop. So if we play them one by one, I'll play this one by itself. This was probably super long. Yep, it was super long. And then it was shortened.
Yeah, we took off 88% of the transient.
So we just wanted to get like a little bit of like movement in it. And the other thing we could do is we regroove a lot of loops for swing purposes and getting them to lock a little bit better. So what we do is we take a loop and then we'll quantize it. So that's why you see all these little markers here. And then we'll go ahead and put the mode in beats transient, put the transient here, and then we'll groove it like this. And it allows us to get all the loops to be in the same groove, because a lot of times you get a hat loop or just a percussion loop in general that has different swing or just slightly different swing. And it sounds a little funky when you hear it, especially if you stack them. In general, I don't recommend stacking them, but for us, that's how we were able to get this like kind of noisy sound we wanted for the drums here. By itself, sounds like this. has so much noise in it. It sounds really good.
If you have
But-
a nice drum loop and it has some reverb in it, this is a good way to get it out.
Yeah, it's a great way to do that, and it cleans it up. And then there's another drum loop that's like this.
Uh-oh.
It's unhappy on this loop. All right. So the drum loop here. Again, if it was really long, it
Such
probably
an
sounds
energetic
good.
loop. I mean, that adds so much energy.
If you were playing, you could probably play this as is. That's what great things are about. It's really great about loops. You can add them to your track and play them as is, or you can do what we're doing is just completely making them sound different. And then the purpose of these loops is that in each section, you get a little bit of a different sound on the drums. So like in the drop section, in the drop section, there's all these loops here on the drop, and then the next drop section adds another loop, which is another tambourine. It's not really anything different, but
and then the next section adds another tambourine down at the bottom.
yep, and the next section adds another tambourine down here.
Yep. It's just little things to keep it moving,
Yep.
And this is actually kind of a major way to keep from overproducing your track, because you don't want to be like, oh, I need a new synth in this section. Oh, I need a new synth in this section, and now you have like 16 different sounds in your tracks.
And you're doing it with
like,
just loops. You don't have to think about it too much.
Exactly. So it's just like these little tiny progressive changes that go.
All right. So the layers that you have for like your claps and open hats, are you progressing those as well, or those always stay the same in the song? Intro to outro.
Those are mostly staying the same. I mean,
they'll change a little bit. Like in the
rides will change.
In the break sections, you'll see that the 909 hat goes away in this section, just so that it has more space for the vocal. And we can use other drums like a snare building up or other synths to help bring the track to a different point. And you'll see in some sections we'll take out the claps in certain sections, or we'll take out this shaker here.
It's
these couple bars.
The clap and the hat are staying way more static than the top loops.
Yeah. And then there's some things like we mentioned earlier, like this other basically this mistake hat, so it sounds a little bit more like unique when it hits. That's the way we do it. You'll see also these loops are very quiet. I mean, you can tell from here, all of them are like super quiet in the mix, like -30, -40. They're really quiet. They're not really doing too much. But if I play the whole top loop by itself without that loops folder,
that sounds good. And now put that loops.
And that's what a track sound like when we start, right?
Yep. Just that's what we mean by that 16 bar loop. Like that's kind of what it's starting to sound like.
Yep. And then we add these loops in here.
Really do lead sounds, we just put in those kind of weird one shots in the basses and our kind of the sound that's kind of become signature to us, which is like those little weird arps, and then just little vocal shots, like exactly like you just said, and that's how we keep our tracks moving forward through a combination of automation, vocal shots in weird places, and our top loops.
And then we have some one shot drums we have that we've chopped up in spaces here, so I'll just play these here. And it's just like things to accent either spots in the bass line or spots in the bar to give it a little bit more groove. So if we play it without these, yeah, the last thing on this group is there's a limiter to catch some of the peaks on them, but they're also, everything in this group is getting sidechained to the hats. So the main hat is really cutting through the mix, and it's not getting like lost by things underneath of it. So all the drums with the processing sound like this. And basically the goal of this is to get them to sound all in the same room, get them to sound like they have some meat to them again, because we shortened everything, made everything a lot shorter. We just want to get everything.
That's the only reason it sounds good.
Yeah. And so our goal is we like really short punchy drums, and this is a way we get really short by punchy drums. API compressor, which is just doing some little bit of compression. There's not much going on here, I think, if I turn this off and on. It's not even really doing anything at all. I think it was on at some point and really not doing much. OTT. We don't really use that much OTT anymore.
We used to use a lot of OTT, and
But-
we used to use on the low end, and then we kind of swapped that up for C6. And then I just feel like OTT is kind of heavy-handed.
Yeah, so we use it super light here on these drums. I think it's just because it was missing some meat.
I mean, even 12% on that thing just like doubled the volume
Yep.
on it. So it's like such a heavy-handed plugin.
Yep. This is the Black Box, which is a great saturation plugin. It's very simple, easy to use, but it sounds really good on drums. So before and after.
Yeah. Texture.
Yeah, it just gives it a little bit more texture. There's some UAD stuff here. So we have the studio on here. I actually going back to like some things I found this over the quarantine because of a disclosure video, and I started using it because of that, and it sounds great. So I'll turn it off and on. And these are just all these plugins are just small changes to get things to sound better.
Just stacking up that different compression feel, you know?
Yeah.
And then saturation.
The UAD here, Oxford Inflator, great plugin to help get some stereo width and some saturation before and after. And you can tell it's like the output of this is so small, it's not such a huge difference. But again, little things go away. Gentle saturator again, 17%, a little bit each time. So before.
Talking about sort of layering the saturators, it's the same thing with sort of layering your inflators and compressors that you guys seem to be doing here. Like you've got the Oxford inflator, then you've got the sidechain glue compressor.
Because they all have their own little feel, you know, they all have their own little
Yeah,
texture.
each of these are really good at something. You can get away with doing this with all stock stuff, which we did for many years. But when we were trying to get things to sound a little bit more, a little like an extra 10% better, that's when we started getting into third-party plugins, and that's what each of these do. Like the Oxford inflator is really great at giving some high end and some stereo width to it. The Oxford limiter does the same thing. The Saturn can give multi-band control, and it can also have a really nice character to it. The Studer gives kind of an analog feel to it. It's just really a little bit of each goes a long way. I'm sure we could have done this all with one or two saturators, but when we went through and we're listening to it again, we kind of mix as we go. So in some ways that's really a great thing because you don't have to spend much time at the end. But other times you get something like this where we have lots of plugins that are just doing small changes that we could have done some other way. But we like these plugins because they give us an extra character that, say, the Ableton saturator doesn't do, or something that if we just use Saturn for, we won't be able to achieve the same thing.
It's going to start sounding the same every time.
Yeah. EQ at the end of these saturators because the limiter brought up some sound and cut out, brought up some low end, so we wanted to cut some of that out. And then we have thermal. Thermal is a pretty interesting plugin. We don't use it very, very much at all. This plugin, I don't know if you know about it, it's by Output. It's basically like a insane distortion, stereo width. Like it just does a lot
like one
of
those
stuff.
combo plugins that have been getting very, very popular.
Yeah. After.
Yeah, things like that and things like Soothe are, which is the next one on the chain, they're so CPU intensive.
Yeah, I'll turn Soothe on so you can hear what it's doing, but Soothe is a huge thing that we started using once we started hearing things more out and in clubs, and also when people are listening to headphones, because Soothe, I mean, we could spend all the time going through and cleaning up frequencies at the high end, but Soothe is a great way for us to automatically kind of do some clarity cleanup in the high end without having to spend too much time on it. And then the last couple things in the drums are, we have them in a separate group called extra drums, which is things like we have a snare roll, which is just getting volume automated. Nothing special. Some crashes that are reversed on the bottom part here, and then some that are just like some hits and just long ones that go after it. So it'll sound something like this. Stuff like that. And then there's some other like weird fill things that are in these tracks, like this one. just like almost sound like mistakes. They're just kind of fill mistakes.
Just little ear candies. That's all.
And then in the drums in the top loop, also there's some other fills at the end of phrases. So here. Just things like that. And we want to, when we arrange our drums, we want to keep, you know, because when a drummer plays, it's not always the same. So you'll see in each section, there's the hats go away in a beat to let that fill come out. The claps go away to let there be just a little bit of a break from the claps. And it's really just about trying to arrange your drums in a way that's unique and groove. So it's not always the same thing over and over again. Let's play this by itself. Each of these little sounds, like this sound is just a mini V sound. It's probably a preset. Let's open it up. Actually, it's something I made. How about that?
There you go.
It's just like a plucky sound, but what makes the sound interesting is stuff like by itself without these two things probably. That sounds like a pretty normal saw pluck. But with these two things, this frequency shifter in the phaser, it makes it
just like give everything with like internal movement.
Yeah, it gives it such a unique thing. We can, you know, it's about, for us, it's about taking a sound that we know that will sound cool, and how can we give it an extra 10%, something that's no one's doing, or something that will make it sound like us.
A little bit of saturation.
Yeah, and each of these sounds have a little saturation in here.
Like a little, like we said before, CLA guitar, it's giving it a little bit of that stereo-ness.
And then the EQ is cutting out a lot of the high end of clicks. A lot of these synths have like a lot of click in them. That kind of click is not really needed. So we cut it out, and a low end to keep space for the track, and it's sidechain so that
get that pumping feel.
Yeah, and it doesn't really
kick.
Yeah, exactly. So, and then there's a couple little hits like this one here, just like a raised stab, another one here, another sample, just little sounds in there. If
that one should have had a little room verb on it. But
there's a pre-drop sound you have in this track, right? It's like, I'm not gonna try and vocalize it, but then you've got a pre-drop.
This
that's really cool.
This like raised stab thing.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
So that sound is a combination of.
It's a bunch of samples and a synth we stacked.
Yeah, so it's this sample, and then just like an old school rave sound. It's a vengeance sample. It's, you know, it sounds bad, but with as a layer, it sounds good. And I think this is just a silence patch, just providing some low end. Yeah, it's just a little bit of low end in it. And we actually do a lot of this in our tracks when we, like, back in the days when progressive house was popular, people layered their sounds. We do the same thing for like little hits like this, because you can get you can take an old school rave stab, which I think initially when we started this track, this was probably what it was. And then we were like, that sounds a little too basic. So we added this layer. It sounds almost wrong. It sounds out of key and wrong and a little funky. And we realized it was losing a little too much energy because it was dropping out too much low end.
Yeah. So
we put a little bit of low end back in it. And then
moral of the story is we pretty much will stack everything.
Yeah. So this is like what the sounds sound like without any processing. It's like kind of like overly stereo in the low end and like not really bright and clear. And so we did things like saturate, different
I don't think we need to
saturators.
get into every plugin, because it's literally, we're pretty much doing the same stuff every time. We're gain staging, saturation. Do the mid-side EQ.
So the big one here is the mid-side EQ, because this low end has a lot of stereo in it. We want to make sure that we cleared it out a little bit. So
it's a trick we learned from Black V-Neck.
Yeah, Black V-Neck is great about doing this with like cleaning up their sounds. EQ 8 mid-side. This is what it sounds like before. After.
Just giving it a little.
It just tightens it up a little bit. So a lot of our sounds, like we mentioned, there's that one, and then there's the other one that happens over here. It's just
it's kind of our sound. We love our ARPs. That's just part of something.
And that's just, I mean, these are all probably presets or things we made really quickly just to give it some some movement in the sections where the drums don't do it.
One good way to get movement on those is you have an auto filter that kind of like opens up as it goes.
Yeah, and this time we did it in the synth.
Yeah,
which is great. And then there's like a little there's a delay that's on it somewhere. I think it's on one of these. Yeah, it's on this end here. If it without it, it just kind of loses a little space. Some more stabs. Again, like it's just a combination of things that we found on Splice or the internet. And that sound again is not that interesting, but it's getting automated with the delay.
It has a phaser on it too.
I think someone one of the sends it has stuff. Yeah. But that's really how we do a lot of our sounds as synths goes. And then the other thing we have in the main synth that everyone probably hears in the track is this vowel. It's just
Beat's gonna come out, dude.
Yeah. And it was like, it's a way in our break sections, we keep movement going without having to change too much, right? We don't want to have the vocal go the entire time in certain sections. We don't want it to sound like the same sound over and over again. It's just, again, it's automating and changing a lot. And this is just Mini V automating the cutoff, and the sound itself. If I play it, I'll play again. It's a preset. We don't spend that much time on making that many sounds unless it's really something we're trying to do specifically. It's really really important to make sure you don't spend too much time on sounds unless you absolutely have to, because you want to write stuff quickly.
It also sounds cool, but
it sounds cool. It sounds like something everyone else did. So we were like, what can we do to make this sound a little different? So we put this vocal filter on it.
And the phaser on it.
There's just like little things we do with all our sounds to get them to sound a little more different. Processing on here is very simple. It's just a little bit of OTT saturation, C6 to clean up the low end, because this had a lot of low end in it. CLA guitars, which was, I think it was giving some stereo, low cut. The filter is filtering it in as for automation for the breaks.
By myself and let me cry. You held me to the flame. I'll never understand you.
Then we'll have a couple other layers as well.
You left me by myself.
And it's just like a little different take, or it's been like auto-tuned.
That's a different take. Yeah.
It's auto-tuned slightly differently. And another one.
You left me by myself and let me cry.
And that one is different because it's been pitched down a bunch. I think it's probably
that infected mushroom manipulator plugin.
Yeah, that's a great plugin.
It's like a big altar boy.
Yeah, and there's some great presets in here, but basically you can do things like you can control the pitch of it, you control the harmonics of it. You can do like the formants shifting, which is really what Altar Boy does. But the big thing here is you have this thing called alternator, which you can allow you to put things down an octave and change how they sound and put them slightly out of key. So it's really useful. So like if I turn this off,
Let me by myself and let me cry.
we melodyne and use, what's it called? What's
Vocal
that?
line.
Vocal line to get them all to be really close to each other. So it sound like one take. And then the manipulator, after that vocal is pretty boring, and then we add this to it.
You left me by myself and let me cry.
And it just gives it kind of like this valley texture. And so when we layer them together,
You left me by myself and let me cry. You held me to the flame. I'll never understand you.
it almost sounds like a male vocal singing underneath of it. So
Yeah.
it's just like kind of giving that like shout even more of like some energy that was missing before.
We remember thinking that it was missing mid range, and that's why we did that.
Yeah, that lower.
Mhm.
Vocal processing, we process each of the channels basically the same, other than on the other one here, it has a Haas effect at the end, so that it's a little bit more stereo. And then the other thing too is we take out more low end on the super pan one, so that it can be a little more clear. There's a de-esser at the beginning, which is just catching the sibilance of things. The other thing we do when we record vocals is we go through and like we find S's and things like that, and we turn them down. So you'll see like this clip here is turned down from this clip here.
Yeah, we also didn't use a pop filter for this one.
Yeah, we just reused a mic. I mean, we used this, I think we use this mic right here, this AKG mic, and it's a good mic, but you don't need anything special. I mean, a lot of times we've recorded vocals on like laptop speakers,
Yeah,
or
do it right. We recorded on my laptop.
yeah, and his radiator was popping in the background, and then I mean, our room, we did this back in my old apartment, and that room wasn't treated at all. So it's just about getting a good take and making as much changes as possible to the sound, as volume automation. And here you can see the volumes change for each of these different gain volume. This one's -0. This one's -3. And then EQ, take out the low end, utility, etc. Not much change here.
Pretty much all the same stuff that we
just did
went over
before.
before. We're doing the same things here. Just little gain staging, little controlling, little compression,
Yep.
little
And then
stereo.
And then there's some group processing. There's just this EQ8 in the beginning, which is just cutting out a bunch of low end from a vocal. So, and then there's this, there's a stressor, which is like it's actually a hardware. It's super, super great, but the hardware one doesn't have a dry wet knob. So we like to use the dry wet knob. And we recorded these directly, and we don't have like a preamp or anything like that. Other than just we record right into my Apollo. Decapitator for some distortion, overdrive. This is just like an LA2A UAD, which is just great for catching some vocals. And then we have this effect rack, which is just like it's kind of a one-stop shop, which I'll play it without and with.
And let me cry. You held me to the flame. I'll never understand you. You left me by myself and let me cry.
It's just basically the dry vocals coming through. There's a short reverb, there's a long reverb, there's a delay. There's like a tape that's just kind of like if I play this by itself, it sounds kind of like just like
Textures and control.
Yeah. Slap delay to give it some width. Again, this is just using H delay. This is another distortion thing, which is just trying to give low end because it was missing some low end.
And let me cry.
And then this one is another distortion of some sort. And it's all just a little on top of each other to make a huge difference. I've seen a lot of people do this before.
Yeah.
Like Reed Stefan has a pack you can get. He has something like that. West End's done this before. You can do that. And then on the vocal also there's soothe, just to get rid of harsh frequencies. Vocals have quite a lot of harsh frequencies. And so that just is a really great way to do it. And then the last couple things on here is there's a utility that turns on and off that provides volume difference, because in the breaks it's a little quieter than it is in the drops, so we have to turn it up a little bit so that it cuts through the mix a little bit better. And then there's SciEQ, which is a great little plugin for getting high end on tracks. So it's not doing anything really much, but it's boosting the high end here and it's giving a little bit of drive. So before and after.
And let me cry. You held me to the flame. I'll never understand you. You left me by myself and let me cry. You held me to the flame. I'll never understand you.
And then there's again, the same washout we had before. And then there's a delay that goes off in certain sections of the track. And the best thing about doing your own vocals is that you have so much control of them. And that's why we really enjoy doing them. And Hannah sounds great on this track too. So she did a really killer job with this track.
Yeah, I got a couple of questions from the Discord like over the last week, but to be honest, the two main questions, you've answered some sections of them, so you might be reiterating yourself a little bit.
No, absolutely.
So the first one is by Dovzy, and he says, I've never really seen someone talk about fills in depth, and they're very important for the track to stay fresh. How much variation should your fills have? When should you be repeating them? Every 4, 8, 16 beats? What do you use for your fills? Etc. I mean, you've definitely gone over what you use for your fills, but in terms of the sort of question about how much variation should they have and when do you repeat them?
Yeah, so we'll do a small fill like every 8 bars, and then we'll do like a larger fill, typically 16, or if it's not a fill, it's like a full section transition.
Yeah, and you'll see like when we do fills, sometimes it's something we've written
here, like at bar
something
57.
Yeah, like sometimes it's something like this where it's just like it's just a sample. Other times we've chopped up samples from things, right? So there's like, you can see here, the sample name is CO. It's like another snare of some sort, and then it's another fill, and then another chopped up sample. So it just depends on, when you're making fills, you just got to find what works for you. And I mean, sometimes we'll write them out. Sometimes we'll just chop them up from other things. It's really about just getting the right thing in the right spot and keeping the groove going. I think the most important thing about fills is that it's variation, right? If you write something that's very, very simple, a very, very simple drum pattern, you can have a complex fill, or if you want to have a very, very busy drum pattern, you can have something that's really simple. It just depends on the vibe of the track. I think that's the best way we can explain that.
I would say, and usually it's like a smaller fill every 8 bars and a larger one every 16. If I had to give you a straight answer, but yeah, there's no real like set formula.
Okay.
The other thing we do too is we don't use necessarily drums for fills. We use, snares and stuff for like the build up or a synth for build up. But like here, because there's a drum fill here, later on the track, there's a section where there's a snare, there's like a synth fill that's like not quite on the right beat. It's like here. It's like here. Just like those are fills too, but they're just fills that are synths. So
yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting question here, isn't it? Because like, what's a fill? Because even just your variation drum group, which is random snares that only come up once every 8/16, is that a fill? Just because it's different.
Well, fills are typical. Traditionally, a fill is what goes into an empty spot in the track.
Yeah, which is what you see that. Like,
that's why I call like what Ryan just showed. I would call those ear candies, but like the little drum line thing, that's what I would call a fill.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So the other question is from SpongeBob's eyelashes. What kind of
nice?
Yeah.
Once you said SpongeBob's, I was like, SpongeBob's what?
That's great.
What kind of process do you go through for sound design when you're making your basses and leads? What kind of layers do you usually work with, presets, wavetables, etc.?
It just depends on the flavor of the moment, I'd say. Like, it's just we spend a lot of, I mean, the most common things we use for synths, we use a lot of
saws for our subs.
A lot of saws that are either high passed or have like a lot of filter movement.
We really don't ever use sine waves in ours. It's like Black V-neck loves sine waves.
Or like 808s, yeah.
Those like 808s.
We have some stuff that's like that. We spend a lot of time. I mean, we have like most of our music is very hardware emulation type synths, like Silence and the Arturia plugins like the Mini V or the Prophet or Diva. Those are the ones we use a lot. We do have some tracks that we've done with Serum that are more in that kind of 808 style of things. It really just depends on what your goal with the sound is. If you want it to sound like very analog-y, you should use something that sounds a little more analog-y, like a sawtooth wave. You can get that in any synth, but it just depends on what you want to do. For like lead sounds, honestly, we spend so much time just finding presets. Like most DAWs have great built-in sounds. Most synths you buy have great presets. You just have to modify them. I mean, I saw a video one time of the Chainsmokers like taking a lead sound and turning the reverb off and turning the delay off and opening the filter, and it sounds like a super saw, and they used it for a track and it got like 1 billion plays, and it didn't spend any time on it other than that. And so you can get really good sounds with just presets, and that's mostly what we do.
I mean, if you take a preset and you change it, that's literally another sound if you think about it.
Yeah.
Like the default sound is technically a preset.
Yeah, and the other thing too is like, if you think about like a guitar or something, like no one goes, "Oh, you used the guitar in this track. How dare you? You used it again." Guitar is a preset in itself. It sounds like a guitar.
As long as you're not ripping somebody else off, people don't really care too much what you use, in my opinion.
Yeah, and honestly, it's just about finding what sounds like you and what you enjoy.
What makes
okay, and I've got one more. This one's real short, but Truth X Lies. What? Any story behind the name?
We just wanted something that had a little duality because we have like different backgrounds, and we also just wanted, like, more importantly, something that was easy to market.
Simple,
easy to market, memorable. It doesn't really mean all that much. We were just like, what's something we could do that's something and something that sounds cool, We didn't want to do like dogs and cats, but like Truth and Lies is like sort of serious, doesn't take itself too seriously, easy to market, easy to brand.
All right, guys. So first off, let me say thank you guys so much for showing us the tracks and answering the last final questions. Now, the most important part of the video, what do you guys have going on? Is there anything we should know about? Any new sick track releases? Maybe something you want us to check out?
So right now we're on the road. We're touring. So check our tour schedule. If we're in a city near you, come and see us so that we can pay our rent. That would be awesome.
Yep, that would be really great.
That would be ideal. Other than that, we just released a track on Night Service Only, which is Sid's label with our buddy Cloverdale. That's doing quite well. You could go and check Understand. We have about 6 or 8 tracks done right now in various forms of getting signed and released, etc. So we don't have another release date to tell you right now, but mainly it's that we have a lot of tunes coming out. We're on the road. And yeah, like you said, we're doing streams. So if you want to pop in every now and then, we'll do a stream on a Thursday where you could send in some music and we'll critique and give you our opinions. We're very, very kind. We won't destroy your music. Yeah, we have a great time doing that. But honestly, one thing is that we like to talk to everybody. So if you hit us up on Instagram, it will take a little while to respond, but we'll always get back to you. Any questions, anything like that, we're always happy to chat.
Yeah, and especially we also have our own Discord. So if you want to come join the Discord, hang out, ask production questions, we try to have a very open community. Just talk about
photos
stuff.
Of your cat.
Yeah, send your best memes, send your cat photos.
Yeah,
we just need, all of us need some dopamine sometime, and that's the best way to get it. So
big facts.
But anytime you want to reach out to us, connect with us, we will be absolutely willing to chat with you.
All right, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for sitting down with us, showing us the track Understand. It was a pleasure to watch. Other than that, you guys take care. Everyone, follow them. Out.
Understand.